if you hearken to the voice that calls you out of your zone of comfort, you do that voluntarily, so you put yourself on the edge of adventure, you will be following the instinct that has already evolved to make your life a blessing to yourself, to make you successful among other people, to maximize your probability of long-term success, and to do that in a way that brings abundance to your community. And then you think, look, let's take the contrary hypothesis. The contrary hypothesis would be twofold. There is no compulsion to adventure. It's like, that seems highly improbable. Or that the compulsion to adventure isn't aligned with psychological and social well-being. Well, what's the chance that the fundamental drive that would facilitate your transformation across time would not be aligned with your psychological integrity and the success of the community? Like, we wouldn't be social animals if that was the case. So as far as I can tell, that has to be true. Now, that doesn't mean you can get lost in false adventures. That can happen. That's what an addiction is, or that's what pornography is. It's a false adventure, right? It's failure to hit the proper target, you might say. But that central drive to integration across time and communally, why wouldn't that be an instinct? And then we could cap that with an observation that I also think is self-evidently true once you understand it. So imagine that you're a father. Now, this spirit of adventure is often characterized paternally, right? Insofar as God's the father in these ancient stories. So think about this. So when you see your son, now it's also true of your daughter, but I'll focus on sons for the moment. When you see your son, and you love your son, when you see your son pushing himself beyond his own limits in an adventurous manner, if you're a good father, you definitely encourage that, right? And I would say, insofar as you encourage that, you are a good father. And that would mean that you're the embodiment of that spirit that calls to adventure. That's why Abraham is characterized, for example, in this story as forging an alliance with the spirit of his ancestors, with the deity of his ancestors. He's embodying the call to adventure, and that's what makes him the father whose reproductive enterprise is successful across the broadest possible span of time. I think I just can't see how that can be wrong. And that's a characterization of the divine. And there's other, it complexifies, because what the stories are trying to do is to give you an image of what that integrating personality might be like, and it's sophisticated, so a single characterization is insufficient. So in the story of Noah, this personality is characterized quite differently. So Noah is presented as a man who's wise in his generations, which means that for his time and place, he's moral and reputable. So he's the sort of guy that people would go to for advice because he's lived a life that's emblematic of his wisdom, let's say. Okay, now a voice comes to him and says, batten down the hatches there, mate. Trouble's coming. Okay, so here's the hypothesis. The hypothesis is the voice that calls to the wise to prepare in times of trouble is a manifestation of the divine, and it's the same as the voice that calls the unwilling to adventure. That's the monotheistic hypothesis. And so you can see what the imagination is doing is agglomerating these different characterizations of high aim, insisting that there's an integrated unity behind them, and then trying to conceptualize that integrated unity across time. And I think that's done with radical success in the biblical library. That the culmination of the library of stories is the impressionistic representation of this integrating pattern. And I think that's what people call on when they're engaging in a religious enterprise that is radically successful, like that happened in the case of your friend, right? So he got a new personality, and that new personality had different incentive structure. And so that just superseded the addiction. So now imagine that underneath that, there's a implicit or unconscious goal. Okay, so I'm saying this for a very specific reason. So the positive emotion that motivates people is always experienced in relationship to a goal. Now, this is a very important thing for everyone to understand, because it means that if you don't have a goal, you have no positive emotion. And it also means that the higher your goal, the more positive emotion you experience when you're moving towards it, because positive emotion signifies progress towards a goal. So you need a goal. the goal of the deepest religious traditions is the ultimate goal by definition. So the idea is that you need a goal, and so you should pick the utmost possible goal. That's another good definition of something like the kingdom of heaven or the realm of the divine, the ultimate goal. Now you have a goal, and every time you see movement towards it, you're going to get, what would you say? You're riding on the energy that's associated with movement towards that goal. That's dopaminergically mediated. That's the same systems that are affected by cocaine and methamphetamine and so forth. All the positive emotion drugs. So you need a goal. That goal, now you can imagine this, that if you're attentive to the action of your own instincts or the divine voice, I don't think those are distinguishable, then a goal is going to emerge that catalyzes a series of transformations. This is what happens to Abraham. So he has a series of adventures after he decides that he's going to go out in the world. And every adventure is marked by the erection of a sacrificial altar and a recommitment of his upward aim. Now there's two reasons for that. One is that he reminds himself that he's aiming upward and he's on an adventure. And the second is he admits to himself that with every transformation of character, something has to be sacrificed. So, now I'm curious about this in your own life, right? So you started obsessively committing to martial arts. What did you have to give up to do that?
Social life.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else?
That's basically it. I was a kid.
Okay, social life.
I didn't really have responsibilities other than school, so I had to leave from school and go right to training. Okay,
so there's an emergent idea in that story of adventure-led transformation, that with every profound transformation of character, something that's not appropriate has to be let go of. That's why, by the way, that's why Abraham's story culminates in the sacrifice of his son. Because the sacrifices get higher in value as the developmental progression upward continues. And that's basically the story of individual development, right? Follow the call of adventure, aim upward, continually remind yourself of your fundamental goal, and then let go of everything that isn't appropriate as you transform forward. So I said the whole story of Christ was prefigured in that image. It's like the story of Christ psychologically is radical acceptance of the worst possible tragedy. That's what it means. That's what the crucifix means. Psychologically, it's like gaze upon that which you are most afraid of. But that story doesn't end there, because in the story, Christ goes through death into hell. So death isn't enough. The abyss of innocent death is not sufficient to produce redemption. It has to be a voluntary journey to hell. And maybe that's true for everyone. And that's like, there is no more terrifying idea than that, by definition. And so then, well, do you gaze upon that? Well, who knows? Who knows?
How often do you gaze upon death, your own? How often do you remind yourself that this ride ends?
Personally?
Personally.
All the time.
Because you, as a deep thinker and philosopher, it's easy to start philosophizing and forgetting that you might die today.
The angel of death sits on every word. How's that?
How often do you actually consciously...
All the time.
Notice the angel?
All the time. I think it's one of the things that made me peculiar. When I was in graduate school, I thought about, I had the thought of death in my mind all the time. And I noticed that many of the people that I was with, these were people I admired fine. That wasn't part of their character, but it was definitely part of mine. I'd wake up every morning. This happened for years. Think, time's short, get at it. Time's short, get at it. There's things to do. And so that was always, it's still there. And it's still there with, I would say, and it's unbearable in some sense.
Are you afraid of it? Like what's your relationship? Death? Yeah.
I was ready to die a year ago. And not casually. I had people I loved, So no, I'm not very worried about me, but I'm very worried about making a mistake.
Yeah.
I heard Elon Musk talk about that a couple of months ago. It was really a striking moment. someone asked him about death, and he said, just offhand, and then went on with the conversation. He said, that'd be a relief. And then he went on with the conversation. And I thought, well, he's got a lot of weight on his shoulders. I'm sure that part of him thinks, it'd be easier just if this wasn't here at all. Now, he said it offhand, but it was a telling moment in my estimation.
So for him, that's a why live question.
Hmm?
The exhaustion of life. If you call it life is suffering, but the hardship.
I'm more afraid of hell than death.
You're afraid of the thing that follows.
I don't know if it follows or if it's always here. And I think we're going to find out.
What's the connection between death and hell?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Is there something that needs to be done before you arrive?
You're more likely to die terribly if you live in a manner that brings you to hell. That's one connection.
And terribly is a very deep kind of concept. Okay.
Yeah. And that's a definition, by the way. So Abraham ends up with a new name because of doing that. That's how different he becomes in the course of his adventure. It's like Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel, and Abram becomes Abraham, because the consequence of him following the pathway of adventure, the calling, is a transformation that's so complete it's as if he's a different person. And those stories are maps of that transformative process. So they culminate in the Christian view of things with the ultimate sacrificial offering. So that's the idea that lurks in the New Testament, is that the ultimate in transformation is brought about by your willingness to put absolutely everything on the line, no matter what. Right. And that's a very different view of the religious enterprise than something like defense against death anxiety. Right. It's the ultimate adventure, and that's the willingness to welcome everything about life that's terrible and painful and malevolent, to welcome that with open arms, to accept that. And that's predicated on a deeper idea even, which is that sacrifice is the basis of community, which is exactly right. Because you have to give up something to be in relationship to the future and to other people.
Right.
Right, so the biblical corpus is an examination of, what would you say, levels of sacrifice moving downward to the ultimate possible level of sacrifice. So in the Abrahamic story, Abraham is requested by God to offer up his son. Right, now he gets him back. The threat isn't carried through. And what does that mean? It means, first of all, that everything in your life, no matter what it is, including your relationships, should be made subservient to the highest possible aim. It also means that a good father sacrifices his children to what's highest. That's the offering of your child to the world, the faithful offering of your child to the world. That's what Mary does. It's a famous statue of Mary in St. Peter's in Rome. Michelangelo made it when he was like 23, some ridiculous early age. Brilliant statue. Mary is holding the body of her son, broken, in her arms, looking serene. He's an adult, off the cross. It's like the female crucifixion. And the idea is that the good mother, the proper father, offers their children to be broken by the world in the pursuit of what's highest.